Okay, so we're talking about the ARRT. And this is a slideshow that was prepared by the ARRT. I'm using it at their permission, and so I'm going to be using some of their text, but when I post the video, don't circulate it too much because, again, it is their material that I'm using for it. So mission statements, of course, give us a good idea of what the guides an organization, what are its reasons for existence. And for them, the ARRT, we're primarily interested in promoting higher standards of patient care, recognizing qualified individuals to be doing patient care, and in medical imaging and radiation therapy and et cetera, et cetera. So the big thing that motivates this organization, of which I'm a member, and which hopefully you will all be members too within less than 2 years, is patient care, right? And recognizing you as completing the standards of excellence for being in patient care. So ethics evolve over time, okay? For the evolution of ethics, of course, it's a pyramid. And what we're talking about is at the top of this pyramid are the rules of ethics. Below that is the code of ethics. Below that is professional ethics. So you can see this is getting broader and broader. Professional, so like how it might relate to you and your work. Then below that is like general ethical codes of society. Ethical codes like things like thou shalt not steal my lawnmower or whatever. And then below that are the moral beliefs, right? So everything rests on this foundation of moral beliefs, that there are things that, like the founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That people are created in a certain way and they have these certain rights that are inalienable to the fact that they are made, right? So those are moral beliefs. A lot of times they have religious suggestions to them. So on top of that, these principles of right and wrong are very broad-reaching. They're shared within our families, and some of them are even subjective in nature, right? They're not always objective. Once we get to enough of these moral beliefs, we may start to develop ethical codes, and they spring from those foundational moral beliefs. So we narrow that down even further into our professional societies and the codes that guide us. And finally, we derive from these the rules of ethics, which are going to be a very thin set of things that relate specifically to how we practice patient care. So the purposes for us are to align professional behavior with the standards or the guiding principles of the ARRT, right? So when you become certified by the ARRT, the ARRT does not license you. They certify you as an X-ray tech, and as you maintain that registration certification, the ARRT is going to continue to recognize you as someone qualified to uphold these ethical codes. Okay? And so one of the things that they talk about a lot, it's on every wall at the ARRT, is this equation for excellence, right? They've actually got a registered trademark on it. This is something that they've identified as absolutely essential to how we perform good patient care. And you'll notice that everything that the ARRT is focused on hinges on patient care. So that's probably the number one takeaway. If you fall asleep during this lecture, Mr. Landtrip, I'm just teasing.
It's true.
I struggle from the same thing.
It's nothing against you.
No, I don't take it personally. I'm the same guy. I'm the same as you. I would put myself to sleep. I wasn't one up here
I
talking.
just don't want you to think
No, it's not personal.
you're terribly boring.
No, I know I'm not boring. I know I'm incredibly, insanely awesome. I'm just, no, not at all. But this equation of excellence, right, that they thought was amazing enough to put a registered trademark on, again, it all centers on what did I say it centers on? Patient care. Every board question you get, every ethical dilemma you're in, the Jesus or the lymphoma answer is patient care, right? And you'll be on the right track. So education plus these ethical codes plus the examination that we all need to pass is what equals excellence. So the way that they've structured that is that there's a code of ethics, rules of ethics, and then administrative procedures. The administrative procedures are actually the terrifying part, right? And I don't know if I still have a picture of it, but at some point I'll show you a picture of this door that is the most terrifying door on the planet, right? But the code of ethics are just termed aspirational. I mean, this is the stuff that we're striving for. We want to attain these things. And so this is as a guide for those candidates, people like you who are students trying to learn this field, as well as for registered technologists who want to elevate their professional conduct, right? The rules of ethics, there's 22 of them to be exact, are like the thou shalt nots, right, of the 10 Commandments. It's things you dare not do as a registered certified x-ray tech, or you could have your license revoked, right? So we'll look at those as well. We'll get into the details of what each one of those rules are. And then these administrative procedures are how the ARRT regulates all of that. Like basically the fines and the license removals and the processes for making those determinations. Let's look first at the... So again, it's an aspirational guide. What? What? I don't know. Did I miss something? Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was the word aspirational and I was back in like 7th grade or something. All right. These are an aspirational guide to professional conduct, providing services with full respect of, especially of patient dignity, delivering patient care free of any kind of discrimination, right? Practicing technology appropriately, and acting with the best interest of the patient. Okay? Let me see what else we can say about that. I think that's it. Yeah, there's a little bit more here. So, we are acting as the physician's agent, right? So when we take a patient's history, I'm not just trying to make conversation with this person. I'm acting as an ambassador of the physician. So anything that I ask or say or do in some ways reflects the attitudes and disposition of the patient towards the physician who's reading, right? So I'm trying to get good patient history and represent the profession well, not just for my own reputation, but for the reputation of the physician as well. I will be minimizing radiation exposure, and that's, again, goes back to the model that we've chosen of assuming that there's some risk with any amount of radiation exposure. Ethical conduct on the individual level, respect of privacy, which some of it is even enforced at the federal level, and then improving our knowledge and our skills, right? And so that's one of the keystones you'll notice in all of my idea evals, in all of my syllabi, it says lifelong learning. Why? Because it's embedded here in this aspirational guide. It's something that I would hope with these Christmas reading lists and things like that, that we all walk away from this program and this experience desiring to learn more about this field and to better ourselves. So, whenever we use this standard of ethics for review, we have to make references back to the original document, right? Not any condensed versions, so not even the slideshow presentation that I'm giving you, right? That's why I've given you the actual document. And one other disclaimer about it is these things do change some. Like, for example, back in the past, the ASRT used to maintain their own code of ethics. They've disbarred their own code of ethics in favor of the ARRT or any licensing body, right? So the number one rule that they've identified is don't use fraud or deceit in obtaining an ARR registration, state licensure, or employment, right? So, for example, claiming that I am CT certified when I'm not, right? That would be a big no-no for them. Rule 2, subverting or attempting to subvert the examination process, right? And you can see both of these first rules relate directly to validating and recognizing the individual who has received this credentialing. First of all, we want to acknowledge that they've received it without any fraud or cheating, and that they've not done it in a way that subverted the credentialing body, right? Rule 3, This relates to convictions, court-martialings, things like of that nature. So this is one where in the past I've had students who have questions about it. So when you actually apply to, not just for your registry, but every time you renew your registration, they will ask you, since the last time that you renewed your registration, have you been accused of any crimes, felony, misdemeanors, things like that? Have you pled guilty to those things? So you're required to self-disclose any misdemeanor and felony charges or convictions, even if there was a negotiated plea or dismissed sentence. Okay, this is super important. So not answering not answering honestly is considered non-disclosure, right? And it's a very serious infraction, and it could result in penalties, including revocation of your certification if you're already certified. And if you think that no one's going to notice, think again, right? Now, I want to just say, when you answer yes to this question, when you self-disclose, yes, I was convicted of a misdemeanor, I shoplifted at a Walmart or whatever, you'll need to provide documentation as well as a personal explanation of what happened. Right? And this isn't the point, this is not the time to say, well, my aunt was really hungry and I needed to stop at the store, but I didn't have any money. And it's not the time to go into that. Like, just succinctly what occurred, right? And then that information will be forwarded along to a ethics review panel, right?
Just out of curiosity, when would they revoke your license? Like, because I know, like, my mom's gotten reckless driving and they didn't take anything from her.
If you have other questions about it, feel free to email me. Rule 3. Violating a rule adopted by state or federal regulatory authority or certified board or failing to report ARRT any violations or actions identified in this rule. What is that talking about? There are states that require state licensure. In fact, Tennessee is about to be one of those states. We're waiting for the legislation to get rolled out. That was one of the things I went to when we were up at Montgomery Bell. So if you're practicing in a state that requires a license, guess what? You need to get a license, right? If you don't, that violation could wind up suspending your ARRT license. It's kind of a no-brainer, but there it is. Rule 5, performing procedures that the individual is not competent to perform through appropriate training. So this is why we are asking you, prior to doing a final comp, that you've received some training on it, right? Is because it's reflective of this rule. I should not be doing things for which I am not trained. It seems like, again, seems like a no-brainer, but to tell you what, there's a lot of people out there who are getting paid to do something and they assume that that makes it okay. Just because you're getting paid to do something does not mean that it's in accordance with this rule, right? So the ARRT had to be very clear in terms of aspirational guide. Unless you've been trained as a nuclear medicine technologist, you do not need to be doing nuclear medicine injections, right? People will ask you to do nuclear medicine injections, and it is then your turn to say, according to Code of Ethics, I shouldn't be doing that because I've not received appropriate training for that. If you want to pay for my training in that, then I'll do it. Right? Between you and me. So just be mindful of what your scope of practice is on that. Rule 6. Engaging in unprofessional conduct, including departing from acceptable rules and standards regarding radiologic scope of practice. So again, we're just trying to clearly define how that could be, how that could happen, right? So we're talking about departure from applicable state, federal, local government laws, like for example, using an X-ray machine for something other than the way that was intended to be used, right? Especially if that could create an unnecessary danger to the patient's life. Now, I will tell you, right, that when I was a radiation therapy student, we did some weird stuff like keep cockroaches inside of the radiation treatment vault to see what radiation did to cockroaches. It does absolutely nothing to them, right? Was that possibly a violation of maybe some bug scientist's idea of what's right to do with bugs? Yes, it was. But are there federal mandates saying that you can't irradiate cockroaches? No. And is there any rule anywhere saying that that could pose a danger to the patient's care? No. So was it weird? Yes, it was weird. Was it an infraction of this? No, it wasn't. It was So it wasn't quite unprofessional. It was oddly professional, I'll say. So examples of what I'm talking about is assessing the need and then conducting an exam on a family member, like your own family member, like your brother. Like your brother falls at Thanksgiving playing football and you decide to run on in and get an x-ray on his. No, sorry, that doesn't work. Or especially in certain states, they don't allow us to inject contrast media. In the state of Tennessee, we're okay to inject contrast media. Try that in the state of New York, you're now in violation of a state law. Only nurses can inject contrast media in the state of New York. So you should be aware of those kinds of things. Rule 7, delegating or attempting to delegate or accepting delegation of a radiologic technologist function or other healthcare function that could reasonably create an unnecessary danger to the patient. What is that talking about? So let's say you had a 4-year-old patient who refuses to hold still for an ankle x-ray. There's no other techs to help you out. So you decide it would be best to put on a lead apron and hold the child's ankle, right, in the correct position while the mother makes the exposure. You have now delegated a professional role to a family member, right? And you would be infraction of this rule. So what if the mother accidentally hit the incorrect button and changed the exposure factors, any number of dangerous things that could impact the patient would be affected by that. Not being able to practice your job because you're drunk. Right? Kind of enough said. Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah. If you are adjudicated, and this means a judge, has ruled you mentally incompetent, mentally ill, chemically dependent, or dangerous to the public. Okay?
Having a drug addict? Chemically dependent?
Yes. Yeah. And this is not your family saying, oh, he's crazy, or oh, she's crazy, right? This is a judge saying it, right? That could hinder the growth of our profession. There may be other jobs that would be best served. Engaging in unethical conduct likely to deceive, defraud, or harm the public, right? So we've talked about defrauding the organization, the professional licensing certifying body. Now we're talking about things that would defraud the public. So this might be, for example, and this happens, believe it or not, but diverting drugs from a healthcare facility, right? Like just, oh, well, one morphine for the patient, one for me. One morphine for the patient, one for me.
I'm from Arkansas. I know all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some interesting stuff.
I like that.
Failure to follow your institute's procedure in terms of checking out contrast. I worked at some facilities where people would kind of like, let's just say we left the Pyxis drawer open, right? Because I'm the only one here using the Pyxis drawer for contrast, and so I don't have to put my name in every single time I draw contrast. I'll just do it at the end of the night. Right? That's a problem. Saying that you did quality control on a CT scanner when you really didn't, that's an infraction of this rule, right? So saying you did any kind of warm-up procedure on your x-ray equipment and you signed off, I did my warm-up procedure, no. Okay, this seems like another no-brainer, but engaging in any kind of conduct with the patient that is sexual or could be reasonably interpreted as sexual, right? And don't ask for people's numbers, even if they're kind of cute. It's probably a bad idea.
What if they ask for yours?
I don't know. But just keep it professional at all times. You don't have to worry about this one.
Like, what are your life lessons?
No, I'll pause. Right. Revealing privileged communication or relating to a former current patient, and of course, any violation of HIPAA is a problem, right? So accessing patient records after watching a television news report about an incident and the victims were taken to your hospital, that'd be a HIPAA violation. Accessing patient's personal information to contact the person for a date. Telling a mutual friend that a coworker came to the emergency department for a drug overdose, also a HIPAA violation, right? One of the big things here is making sure that we're not accessing anything that could be damaging to an individual, right? Now, there is an evolving caveat to this that applies to the physicians, and so I should mention it to you now. You might work in facilities where you have physicians who are taking photographs of x-ray images, possibly even posting those images to Facebook. I have had doctors show me images on their cell phone that they just took a picture from DICOM, like just with their cellular device. That is an evolving area of social media and medicine and medical law pertaining to physicians. You are not physicians, right? That may be permissible for them. There is still a gray area there, and there may be a need and a time to use something like Facebook to discuss a patient's case with another physician, right? I can conceive of a time when that might be appropriate. For x-ray techs, I cannot conceive of a time where that would be inappropriate, right?
If someone took a picture of an X-ray that didn't have any patient information.
Again, I have done that myself, right? I won't lie. I've done that as an educator. I have done that, right? If it is something that I'm using within the classroom and it's one of our clinical facilities, that is within my scope of practice to do that. But for you, if you're engaged in workaday x-ray tech, I would just say don't even mess with it. I mean, I work with the legal team at corporate all the time, so I'm familiar with all the ins and outs of how HIPAA law relates to educators. Unless you want to start hanging out with lawyers, I would just say don't do it. You don't have to worry about it then. Okay? Feel free to take down an XR number and a date or patient information and pass that along to us. We can access it here in class.
So what if it was like an image that we wanted to study before pre-comp, like before oral comp or something? Because a manager told me that as long as there was no information on the image, that it was okay.
I would get that in writing from that manager. Yeah. There's all of those images are readily available on Google.
Right.
Yeah. Fraudulent billing practices. So you've noticed there's a lot of stuff about fraud. We want to be careful that if we did a 2-view x-ray, we're not charging for a 3-view, those kinds of things, right? Again, you may be asked by a facility to kind of wiggle a little bit here, and you can just say, no, I'm sorry, that's outside of... So this is technically Medicare/Medicaid fraud, so it's fraud against the government that the provision is fraud. Improper management of patient records. So an example of this would be altering patient records to cover up a mistake. So you did Mrs. Smith's X-ray on Mr. Jones. Now you're going to compound that by shuffling the electronic medical record around somehow. Don't do that. That's a problem. Allowing a person with improper authority. So if they don't have a valid state license or ARRT certification, they shouldn't be practicing in the field, right? So if you are a manager at some point, it is your job to make sure that every one of your technologists have the credentials they say they have, right? Again, another controlled substance law. I don't have answers for y'all. Like if you go to Denmark or Amsterdam or Colorado or I guess now the state of Massachusetts, wherever else, and consume controlled substances, whatever, that's still a violation of federal law, right? If it's done within the United States of America. So I don't see this being a big issue, but I would be very aware of that. But the big thing here would be stealing a prescription pad and writing yourself a prescription for narcotics, or fraudulently calling in a prescription, like for whatever.
We've done that at the pharmacy. We caught some folks.
Yeah.
Well, one time I can think of somebody wrote a promethazine cough syrup with codeine in it, and she wrote it in herself, and we saw that. We called the doctor to verify the directions because it was a little weird, And he said, I didn't write that. So he said, fax it over to me, and then he called us back and said, hey, I didn't write this. So at that point, we called the cops. And what we do, we like take the prescription and we act like we're filling it and like there's nothing wrong with it. And while we're getting it ready, we call the cops, and they like undercover. They're in like normal clothes. She came through the drive-through, and they were like kind of hanging out, and then they blocked her car in and came out with like a gun and stuff. It was crazy.
You were in a sting.
I know, it was crazy. I was in a sting. Yeah, definitely.
What was the lady doing?
She was just getting her prescription.
No, I'm saying like, what she did when the cop showed up?
Oh, she just like threw her hands up and like got over her car. I felt so bad because there was a guy. We have 2 lanes in our drive.
So if, for example, Rule 14, if a patient falls and you kind of doctor things to say, no, the patient didn't fall, that's a problem. Subverting or attempting to subvert the CE requirements. This will, not only will you lose your license with this one, you'll get slapped with a fine, right? And this one is kind of weird because people might still do this in some of your departments, like post the answers to their CE quizzes, like it's just kind of out of the way somewhere. If you find techs that are doing that and they get on your bad side, guess what? This is a good way to get them disbarred from ever working again. The ARRT takes it very seriously. They spend a lot of money on developing those things, and they want to make sure that, I mean, it's kind of a dumb thing to just, like, why not just do the quiz yourself? You know, and learn the material. Is learning that painful?
Just orally telling them the answers?
Well, that's going to be a hard one to catch, right?
Or
But
to prove.
yeah, to prove. But
Oh, that's what I'm doing.
but I mean, we all have cell phones with video cameras on them now. So I mean,
Blackmail.
yeah, there you go. I think blackmail is in here though, somewhere, Miss Williams. So don't say that too loud. All right. Making a false statement or knowingly providing false information to the ARRT or failing to cooperate with an investigation. So again, saying that you saw something or didn't see something when the ethics panel comes and asks you, hey, did this really happen? Don't do that. Engaging in false or misleading communication regarding person's education, training, experience. So saying I'm a doctor if I'm not a doctor, saying I'm a CT tech if I'm not a certified CT tech, that would be an infraction against Rule 20. We're winding it up. Just one more to go after this one. Knowing of a violation or a probable violation and failing to report it, right? So knowing that something happened, patient fell, they covered it up. I know that they covered it up, and I'm not going to say anything. Now you've just implicated yourself in this thing, right? So again, like, these go to some depth. But the final one is failing or to immediately report to a supervisor an error made in connection with imaging, treatment, or care for a patient. If you make a mistake, you need to have the sense of honor and patient care that will allow you to even say, look, I made a mistake, right? Because a lot of these mistakes can be fixed, even if they feel completely unfixable. Between you and me, I've made mistakes in this field. They felt completely unfixable. And I sat with that for a long time. It's not fun. It's not fun for anyone. But owning up to it, at that point, is the only good option, right? Unless you want to just compound error on top of error. It's the only way that we'll learn from it. So, in review, we've talked about the evolution of ethics, the purpose of the standard of ethics, the structure. We've talked about these codes of ethics, as well as the specific rules of ethics, right? Let's talk a little bit about these administrative procedures, and this is where I said I have a picture that I'll show you of a door. It's the most terrifying picture I've ever seen, a door I've ever seen. I'll show you that in a minute. But what these so if there is an infraction that's reported, there is an administrative process that's kicked into effect up in the city of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, where the ARRT is set. And they handle reports of those complaints, they document the volume of complaints, and they make categories as to where the violations are, right? So you're going to get to sit in their place in just a minute and review these kinds of things, right? They also have an investigative staff, people who go and look into these things, right? And then they make recommendations for ways to improve their process, as well as related to specific violations. If a person happened to be found in violation by the ARRT of these things, they would have a hearing, either in person or written. There's an appeal process. It's written only. Only in a written way can you appeal this stuff. And you can have requests for a sanction removal, and that's only after a certain amount of time has elapsed. So I mentioned I've known technologists that were found in violation of narcotics law, were incarcerated, served their sentence, reported it to the ARRT. They had a probationary period, right? Kind of coincided with their parole period where they could not work in the field, and the ARRT asked them to then reapply, right? So that's typically how that process works.